Hello everybody. Today, JM's Rules for Life number 114. Not to be confused with 113, which is that in everything you do, you must put a Pixar reference. 114 states that when a man leaves his Aston Martin on your driveway for a few days and insists that you take it out for a drive and have fun, you don't let him down. That is exactly what I'm doing today, and I'd be very happy doing this on my own, but I thought I'd invite you along for the ride. First off, because it's a lovely day to be out in an Aston Martin, and secondly, because I smelt the potential for a vlog. You see, I get to drive a lot of Aston Martins in this fabulous and very lucky life that I lead, thanks to all of you. However, it is, I'm sure, obvious to you all that I've also yet to buy one. So today, that's exactly what I intend to discuss. Really, for myself, and I'm sure it's the case for many, my fascination with Aston Martin began long before I could drive. And yes, I have also been very vocal about the fact that I do get rather annoyed that people talk about every Aston as if Bond had one. There was never an Aston DB9 driven by James Bond, which made the DB9 Bond edition borderline laughable and a tad cringy, even though it was otherwise a fantastic car. Likewise, the many V8 Vantages out there with James Bond themed number plates and the like, it's just awful. That being said, if I could have any Aston Martin, it probably would be from a Bond film. Either a DBS, as in Casino Royale, or money no object, the V8 Vantage of the living daylights, after it had been winterized. Should you be in the lucky position to buy one of these cars, don't get caught out by Blofeld's dodgy discount motor cars. Use a car vertical search to make sure no evil supervillain has pranged your gorgeous conveyance and tried to hide it. A reg plate or VIN check is all you need for Car Vertical's Q branch to check out the history of a car, and in just 60 seconds they'll give you all the information you need to know before parting with your money. For a special discount on the service, don't forget to use my code JM10. And why not hit the comment section and tell me, what's your favourite Aston? Is it one seen on the silver screen or something a little more unusual? Please, tell me. I'd love to know. The simple fact is, even without the world's most famous spy, they're still cars that hold a real appeal. They're proper GT cars, at least when done right, meaning that they can get you to your destination in comfort and hopefully good time as well, but when you've arrived, if you happen to find a decent little ribbon of tarmac, you can have a lot of fun. And I'm not going to say that every Aston has been brilliant. In fact, one of the most lust-worthy, the DBS, which definitely is a Bond car, actually, is probably one of the worst I've ever driven. Particularly with the manual, which I know is the one that everybody would want. It's a clutch that's awful to use, a gear shift that's rather forgettable, and a ride that is simply punishing. And that's a shame, because it is a car with drop-dead gorgeous looks, a sonorous engine note, and I just want one, even though I know it's bad for me. I'm like a kid with a nut allergy staring at a Snickers going, I know I want it, but I also know just how terrible it's going to be. Stuff like this is a little bit more sensible. What I'm driving today is the world-famous DADB9. It belongs to my good friend Ben from the channel Dad Cars. If you don't know who he is, and I am on a mission to make sure it's a world-famous car, he's a chap who, when he had his third child, decided, you know what, I'm going to get an Aston Martin, because he saw that it had 3 spare seats, he had 3 children, and therefore the maths worked. He is of the same age as me, so was in his, I think, early teens when the infamous episode of Top Gear aired, in which the DB9 was dubbed so cool it didn't have a place on the cool wall, instead being given its own fridge. And for someone of an impressionable age, that is something that sticks with you. It turns out that the DB9 was a car generally well liked, but not by all, Evo magazine notably. However, over the years it was improved, and this slightly later example is a very fine thing. Fabulous engine, decent Touchtronic 2 gearbox, nice leather interior, and sure, plenty of imperfections, but still, it's a car I hop in and go, yeah, I quite like this. I would have one. So, why haven't I? Well, there are many reasons. For about the first sort of 26, 27 years of my life, the answer was really very simple. I could not afford one. It wasn't until I was, I think, 27 or so, and I started my YouTube channel, that I actually bought any car that cost more than about £15,000. At that point, I didn't do finance on anything. As I was working freelance, nobody would have given me finance anyway, even if I wanted it, so I was stuck with what I could afford cash, and I don't think that's a bad thing, by the way. I think it's a very good thing. And so the most exciting car I really had up until that point was a BMW Z4M Coupe. I actually did get to drive an Aston Martin. My dad was on the hunt for a Mercedes SL, so I went to a garage in Needham Market, not far from where he lived, called Kerridge's. Sadly, no longer there, and they had an SL 320. He was trying to work out whether he wanted the 320 or the 500, so I went and drove the 320 and said, Dad, no, you want the 500, trust me. However, they also had a DB7, and because this is 10 odd years ago, I think the DB7 might have actually been marginally cheaper, or at least the same price as the SL. And that had the V12 in it, a lovely carbon fibre interior too, and the automatic gearbox, which would have put me off, but not him. He would have probably preferred it. And I said to them, could I take the Aston Martin out, please? It was dark already, it was winter time, so even at 4:30 it was pitch black, and to be fair to them, they said, yeah, of course you can, knowing full well that I wasn't going to be spending any money with them. I always remembered that. That was a special and important moment. I always appreciated that. Anyway, I went out in the car, kind of enjoyed it, certainly much more than the Mercedes SL. Unfortunately, I think I scuppered things when I said to Dad what the official fuel economy figure was, and according to them, it was 11. And though he obviously had a couple of quid because he was looking at buying an Aston Martin potentially, he said, yeah, 11's a bit too much for me, thank you very much. Will not be having a DB7. Should have kept my trap shut, really. Roll on a few years, I started the YouTube channel, and one of the first people to lend me a car was a lovely chap called Tony. By this time, I'd got my Lotus Evora 400, so I jumped straight from spending, you know, £15,000 on a car to near 70, a huge leap. In the interim, I'd been given the opportunity to drive many other cars, so it wasn't like I hadn't driven anything. I'd got decent experience with a few different Jaguars, things like that. Nothing exceptional. The odd Ferrari, okay, that's exceptional, isn't it? I drove a 355 a couple of times, but beyond that, nothing else that spicy. I had this Evora, and a lovely chap called Tony said to me if I'd like to do a piece with his V8 Vantage S, which I certainly did, not just because it was a V8 Vantage S, but also because that was a car I'd considered buying in place of the Evora 400. At the time, there were several reasons I chose not to. The Lotus seemed like the more interesting, unusual car. As I was starting YouTube and it being a business, I thought the Lotus would be more of a USP than the Aston. Aston already had quite a few people making content, and the Vantage was a fairly old car even by then. You're talking about 2016 I started, so the Vantage was already over a decade old. The Evora 400 was brand new. But I went out in the car, I had the Sport Shift box, and though it was a very pretty thing and the engine rather good sounding, I felt like the gearbox was really a letdown. The interior, though nice, I also felt kind of overwhelmed a little bit. In all of these cars, you feel like you're sat down in a bathtub, lots and lots of dash. In the Lotus, it's the opposite. You feel like your feet are basically on the tarmac. You feel like you could reach out and touch the road surface. I kind of liked and appreciated that, particularly for the experience level that I had at the time. The other issue that I had was the fact that the Aston also rode incredibly stiffly. Very, very firm car, and it wasn't very good on fuel. The Lotus was on a run. You could easily get 34 to the gallon. The Aston, never that good. On a recent trip, with a V8 Vantage S, I think about the best I got was around 25. In fact, this isn't even that much worse. This has been averaging about 22 on the admittedly long, boring motorway run that Ben did with it the other day to get to me. In case you're wondering why this car is with me for a few days, that's because Ben is on a dad venture. On my behalf, actually. I'm very, very grateful to him for that. I need to bring my 968 back, you see, because I have decided it is time to move it on. I really would like to be able to keep it, but I do have to be brutal with what I have and don't have. And the fact is, at the moment, I don't have a nice, sensible four-seater, but I do have the 968, and that doesn't really do anything that other cars on the fleet don't already. So, the 968 has to go, something else has to come in. So, Ben has hopped on a plane up to Scotland. He's going to retrieve the car from my other good friends who I've also met from YouTube, George and Caitlin, who've been kindly hosting the 968 for the last, well, 9 months, I guess, and taking very, very good care of it. And the 968 is going to be slowly working its way back to me. On the way, Ben is going to be doing a little bit of filming, so if you want to know more about that car on a long journey and how he gets on having 2 children in a car with no air conditioning on a rather warm day, tune into his channel. It's not actually that hot out there. He should be okay. I'm gonna just turn the AC down on this. Just 17, 18. Doesn't do half degrees, this car, though. Gonna deduct points for that. And anyway, I've been rabbiting on for a little bit already, haven't I? How about a musical interlude? In case you begin to think that your eyes deceive, no, I will be mixing in shots of various other DB9s and indeed other Aston Martins throughout this video. Though I am driving Ben's car, it's not specifically his or indeed a DB9 that I'm talking about. However, that short blast there is enough to remind me that although as human beings we always want more, and I'm very lucky to have cars with more, the fact is this with just 450 horsepower or so is adequate. You could use many words to describe the DB9, but slow is not one. This engine is quite capable, pulls from 2000 RPM or so, and though it doesn't rev as high as the Ferraris, this is essentially done by 7, whereas the F12 goes on to closer to 9, it's still a wonderful thing and makes a distinctly Aston noise while doing it. I don't know quite how they've achieved it, but there is no other V12 that sounds quite like an Aston Martin. I love it. I really, really do. And I know lots of people that have got Aston Martins. They're all lovely as well. I know quite a few businesses who service, work on Aston Martins, do Aston Martin related stuff. And on the many, many occasions I've thought about buying one, they've all been lovely and supportive. I've done my usual due diligence, spoken to people, and they've all said they'd love to support me. They watch the channel, they like what I do, and they'd love to help me out, which is more than I can say for many of the other brands that I've owned. But how is it I've not come to own one of these? Well, early days when I had the Evora, simply couldn't afford to have anything else. I did consider an Aston, but I'm also the kind of person where, okay, though my head says, yeah, but a 4.3 is enough, you start to think, yeah, but is it though? Okay, maybe I don't want the engine, but I would like the nicer, slightly later interior as you get with this car. The old one, well, it's old. And I would want Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, and I know you can install that, but ultimately it would be better if you get a real later one, then you're suddenly spending 60 or 70,000 pounds, and that's just too much. For me now, I couldn't afford to spend 60 or 70 grand on another car without losing one. I don't want to sell the 550, I don't want to sell the F12, and I don't want to sell the 430, so that's kind of an issue now. But in the past, there have been moments where I've had money to buy a car, and at one point when I went and bought the Quattroporte, I was actually originally thinking about a V8 Vantage. I figured it would make an excellent project. I'd never had an Aston. I know my audience likes Aston Martin stuff, and I like Aston Martin stuff. I wanted to do things to the car, modify it, play around with it, and I had said, you know what, I've got enough budget for a 4.3, and my sensible cap was actually on at that point. So I spoke to a few people, looked around, found a couple of examples. One was in a stunning colour, a beautiful green with a kind of cream or tan interior. I can't remember exactly which. Lovely thing. However, had not a scrap of paperwork with it. Then it turned out it was being sold by someone on behalf of someone who had died and had been inherited, and the story got really complicated, and I just thought, yeah, you know what, I'm out. As soon as that car was discounted, I found another, this time at a dealer, a blue example, similar price, similar mileage, a good base for some work. I got in touch with them and they came up with the most ludicrous excuse as to why I couldn't go and view the car, claiming they'd be fined thousands of pounds under COVID rules, which didn't exist by then if I went to go and view the car without an appointment. So I said, okay, make me an appointment. I'll be there in an hour. And I said, oh, no. And then it turned out the car was off in storage somewhere and there were all sorts of things. And I'm like, why are you lying to me? Why'd you have to do this? Though that wasn't an Aston Martin main dealer, I had actually had an experience with one of them a few years earlier when I was buying what turned into the Evora, Aston Martin Cambridge, in case you're wondering. I made an appointment, I turned up on time, and I stood in the showroom for about 5 minutes. Felt like longer, but I'm sure it was about 5 minutes. And though I was on time, all the salesmen were there in the kind of little square goldfish tank that they have, looking at me. And nobody came out to say hello. Nobody came out to offer me a drink or anything else. And I just felt like I was a bit of a nuisance. I felt like I wasn't really wanted, and that was a shame. And this was also where I came to realise something that has kind of bugged me nearly constantly since. In that showroom there was a great variety of Astons. They had a DB5 essentially there really to show off. They had Vantages and V8, V12 guys, DB9, they had a DBS. The new range wasn't out by then, but they had a second gen Vanquish, which is a car I've always kind of been a bit lusty for. And I realised they all basically looked the same. At that point in time, I realised if I have an Aston, unless it's something really rather special, by which I mean I probably could never afford it, I really don't want it in silver, grey or black. This is to say nothing of Ben's choice. They look fabulous in silver, grey or black. But let's not beat about the bush, shall we? Look, I am not a silver or grey Aston man, okay? Yeah, I know. I got red Ferraris. Sue me, okay? But in a colour, even a base 4.3, plain, no frills, V8 Vantage in blue, red, green, spectacular. They just don't turn up all that often. Wind the clock back on a few years, we're now firmly into YouTube territory, things have been going well, and I was thinking about buying something nice. I'd had a few good months, I'd saved up some good money, I had a deposit available, and I thought, you know what, this is a good opportunity to get something really quite tasty. And top of my list was a V12 Vantage, more accurately a V12 Vantage S. You see, by this time prices had done some odd things, and you got to the stage where the early V12, which all had manuals, were essentially the same price as the later, more powerful V12 Vantage S, but with the 7-speed sport shift box. You could also have those with a 7-speed manual dogleg, but that was a lot more money. So I thought, you know what, actually, I have driven one with the Sport Shift box, again, courtesy of another lovely person I met through the channel, actually through Lotus Connections, James, and I could live with the box. I could live with it. I could deal with it for the, you know, money you're talking about. I'd rather have that than the early car with the suspension and whatnot that I didn't like. I drove a couple of 100 miles to go up to the dealership at Leeds to look at this car, and I was kind of disappointed. It was in a fairly plain spec, black interior, standard seats, standard wheels. Wasn't really what I wanted, but the price was okay. It was 75 grand. They knew I was coming to look at it. I was kind of hopeful if the car was right that I could get it for about 70. The key thing I liked about this car was that it had a lot of miles on it, just under 50,000. And so I went up to look at this car. The day before, they dropped the price to 73 and a bit, which I thought was odd. Anyway, I go to see it, and when I get there, the front of the car looks like it's been cleaned with a scouring pad. Bits of the wing mirror are kind of hanging off. The whole car just doesn't really look like it's been prepped correctly. And then when I spoke to the guy and said, can I see the service history? He gives me the book with the stamps in it, And then when I asked to see the paperwork, he tells me they haven't got any of it. There ensues an argument about the value of said paperwork, where I tell him, look, this is a car that's got near 50,000 miles on it, and with the Aston Martin Sport Shift system, unlike the Ferrari system, the car won't tell you how much life the clutch has left in it. And as a clutch, I think, was 4 or 5 grand, something like that, that's a kind of big thing. You want to know about that. This is not a 500 quid thing. And at 50,000 miles, there's a good chance the car might be needing a clutch soon, and a clutch is not something the dealer is going to pay for. Even if it fails, you know, 2 weeks later, they'll just tell you, look, it's a wear and tear item and consumable. Good luck, you have to fight us to sort it out. And I didn't fancy that. They couldn't understand why it was important to have proof of whether it was or wasn't done, and the fact they didn't have proof tells you that it hasn't been done. So I went to make them an offer of 70 grand. I'd done the finance numbers, I knew I could get this car, I knew it could be done, and they said no. They said, no, it's already cost us far too much money, we're already losing money at 75 grand, we're not going to take your 70 grand, it's an insulting offer, go away, please. So I went away. They later then dropped it about 2 weeks later to 71 grand, then to 70, then to 69, then to 68. Then they put a silly wing on the back of it, the AMR wing, which just looks awful. Then they emailed me and said, would you like to buy the car now? It's cheaper. And I said, no, I was going to buy it, but in the interim, I wound up buying the F12. In case you're sat there thinking that's a bit of a leap to go from a 70-odd grand Aston Martin to an F12 that cost more than double, well, part of the reason that was a more doable thing than you'd imagine is because Aston Martin finance values are atrocious. The residual values on these cars are awful. And if you don't speak finance, essentially, what you're doing when you essentially lease these cars, you have your sticker price, let's just call it £100,000, and then they work out in 3 years or whatever what they reckon it's going to be worth. Let's just call it £60,000. So a key factor influencing how much you're going to pay is how much they reckon the car's going to lose in depreciation. Let's call it 40 grand. Now, I was looking at these cars. Let's say you got an Aston V12 Vantage S or whatever at £70,000. Well, the residual value was about £40,000, which is not stellar. However, you then look at a car which is much later, much newer, better specification, better colour, less miles, all that, and it's now a £95,000. Yes, it's 25 grand more, but the residual value is only 2 grand more. This actually happened. I got this quote, and all of a sudden you're paying a shed load more on finance. I got some quotes on our Vanquish, because that's more equivalent to the F12, and our Vanquish, to have one of those, and I've actually considered it recently. I've enjoyed the F12, I love the F12, it's done nothing wrong, but I'm greedy, I want to experience all the things while I can, and a Vanquish is still a car I lust after. However, between interest rates going up and the pretty poor residual values of Astons, I could go and buy a Vanquish that's £30,000 cheaper than the Ferrari, and wind up paying the same amount every month. I'm not going to do that. That's just not going to happen. Aston dealers do not help themselves. I looked at another 2 V12 Vantage before I did eventually buy the F12, and in both cases I thought the cars were slightly overpriced, and I made offers to both of them. One of them did eventually get back, but about a week too late. The other one said no, they wouldn't accept the offer. Even though I was then out of the market, out of curiosity, I decided to follow what happened to these cars, and all 3 of them that I made an offer on, and 2 of the 3 I've been refused on, they dropped the price below what I'd offered. Which just maddened me. I just sat there thinking, why? So anyway, it's not that I haven't ever tried to buy an Aston. There is another side to it, because there is a possibility, you know, and I'm stupid and I'm daft and I've got way too many cars. I've got like 11 or 12 cars at the minute. That's too many. Too many. I need to thin the herd, but I'm also really bad at it. Because I started with 5 and I said I should thin the herd, and now I've got 12. So the thing is, I like to make sure that all of the cars do something a bit different to one another. That's important to me. It's a way of justifying in my silly man brain having all these different things. And the simple fact is that just about every Aston out there that I'd want, so I'm going to ignore the Rapide and the DBX, they're kind of similar to what I've already got. V8 Vantage, well, I've got the 550 and I suppose the F12 as well, and then you talk about DB9, DBS, well, 550, F12, and you know what? I love the F12. It's got a really big boot. It's actually weirdly practical. It's a fabulous thing to drive. I've done lots and lots of miles in it. I love that bloomin' car. But I want an Aston. I do want an Aston one day. And I think it is fair that if maybe a good example came up at like 22 or 23,000 pounds, when the 968 sold, that's going to be going for possibly similar money. I'll get a bit less, but it's going to be advertised, I think, at 22 grand. So I'll get, I don't know, 18 or something, let's say, after we've done the work and prepped it and everything else. I could go and get an early V8 Vantage and it'd be a lovely thing, but then I'd be saying, well, there's another two-seater. I don't need it. I want it, but I don't need it. And I cannot ignore the practicality factor. Though for most of my daily duties, a two-seater or 2+2, as annoying as they are, is fine, the boots in these are a little bit annoying. The later Vanquish is a bit better, but the DBS, the DB9, the V8 Vantage, they're all quite compromised. It was one area of the Astons that always frustrated me. For a GT car, they just weren't ever that good on storage space. That seems like a daft oversight. Another element that I haven't discussed thus far, but also cannot be ignored, is that certainly when you're spending big money, anything that's big enough that I have to finance it, so, you know, 50, 60, 70 grand purchases, I'd have to finance one of those. I've got to make it work on the channel. I'd love to have bought a DBS and fixed what I felt was wrong with it, because I bet you can. But Mr. JWW went and bought one, and he created what looks like a gorgeous specification out of it. So that's kind of done. Lots of people have had a V8 Vantage. Oh, and there is another time I went to buy an Aston that I don't think I've ever shared on the channel at all. But before that, how about another musical interlude? So, wind the clock back about a year or so ago. My first 430 Scuderia, the grey one from Dick Lovett, that had been returned on account of the fact it had problems that they simply couldn't fix. And I was thinking about what to buy. High on the list, and what I eventually did get, was another 430 Scuderia. I also thought about things like an Aventador, various other cars, but I decided the 430 and I had unfinished business. However, I have always wanted to buy a car from new. The only new car I've ever had previously was my Evora 400, but I don't really count that because it was a car that was in stock. I didn't specify it, and I would love, as someone that's grown up playing on the Porsche configurator endless times, I would love just once to be able to buy a new car that's really mine. However, at the moment I'm kind of stuck between cars that, well, I just don't want to buy new, cars where there isn't really much you can specify, like the Lotus Emira, they're all basically the same, so there's just no point doing it, and cars that I cannot afford, like the Ferrari 296, the 488 Pista, that sort of stuff. But the Aston Martin V8 Vantage, flawed as it may be, with the right specification, is quite a tempting thing, and I figured, you know what? They're not selling any of them, they certainly weren't 2 years ago. I bet there's a deal to be had. So I got in touch with a dealer, went through the spec. It wasn't crazy, it wasn't wild, but it was exactly how I wanted it. No more, no less. £157,000, in case you're wondering, is what they quoted. The finance numbers were pretty scary. I mean, they were asking, I think, near double a month versus what I wound up paying for the 430. But I thought, you know what, maybe they can help out, maybe they can do a deposit contribution, something like that, chuck some bits in, I don't know, to try and level the playing field. And they said, no, we are not doing a penny discount, nothing, nada. And the really annoying thing is that only about a year or so before this, Aston had very famously been essentially giving these things away. They wanted to clear stock of the V8 Vantage, so you could buy them, and I think this is 2019, 2020, something like that, for £1,000 down, £1,000 a month. Now I was looking at a car with about £50,000 down, and it was still going to be more money a month, and they wouldn't discount it. They wouldn't knock a penny off. And I said, well, I'm not going to have it then, because I can see what they're worth. They're worth like 100 grand, basically, the minute you take them. I'm going to be kissing goodbye to 50 grand. I don't have that kind of cash to just give away. And they said, oh, well, actually, if you want an AMR, we could do a deal on one of those. And I said, hang on a minute, the AMR, that's the manual one, isn't it? I said, yeah, that's the one. It's limited edition, isn't it? They said, yeah, it is. I said, how many did they make? Because this came out like a couple of years earlier. So they made 200 of them. Right, so it's a limited edition manual one that they made 200 of, and they haven't sold them all. Yeah, that's right. Oh, so how much money would you give me off one of those? Because I'm thinking then, well, maybe I can spec out one of those to one. He said, oh, 20 grand, but here's the spec. So I said, okay, so what you mean is you've built one and you're desperately trying to get rid of it and you're going to knock 20 grand off. The AMR was just a weird joke. I don't get it. I don't understand it. I really, really don't know what the point was, because the only thing that was interesting about it was the fact that it had a manual gearbox, which then became an option on the regular Vantage anyway. I think they should have just said, hey, we're going to make like 200 of these in manual. That's it. There will be no more ever. Maybe they'd have sold them, but no. So that didn't go so well. I also have never had any luck whatsoever with the Aston Martin press team. They don't respond to my emails. They don't talk to me. I'm not going to say they don't like me, because I don't really know if they like me or not. I mean, they might not, I don't know, but they just don't talk to me. So I've got to be sensible and business-headed with these kind of things, and if there's no opportunity for content creation, for growing a relationship with me and Aston Martin, which I would love to have, then I kind of had to do the sensible thing. And at the time, that was buying another Ferrari, which I did, and I certainly haven't regret. But after all that, here I am on a glorious, sunny summer's day in an Aston Martin, having an absolute whale of a time. I had a couple of brilliant weeks up in Scotland behind the wheel of a V8 Vantage S, and although that car wasn't perfect, I believe it's much improved now. That was another car I got to drive courtesy of a fabulous person I got to meet through the channel, Richard Groves from Challenge the Road. He has his own channel as well. And the people and the opportunities I've met, the experiences I've had through Aston Martin have been absolutely fabulous. And I desperately, desperately want to be a part of that community. Getting to drive a DB6 was a highlight, not of my YouTube career, but of my life. That was a special experience, really quite wondrous. For anybody to be able to say they've sat in an Aston is a big deal. To be able to say you've driven an Aston is a really big deal. To be able to say you've driven many Astons, including ones worth hundreds of thousands of pounds, that's huge. The generosity of all people, not just Aston owners, in helping me do what I do. And they all do it just for the love. Nobody gets paid to bring their car on the channel. And the fact was that for a long time, I didn't get paid to do this. But the love that's shared through these cars is absolutely fantastic. I will never, ever forget it. And I don't want people to think that even for a microsecond, I don't appreciate it, because I really, really do. And so I desperately, desperately want one of these cars. And one day, it will happen. But those are a few of the reasons why that day has not yet come. Huge thank you to Ben for letting me borrow his car, and of course going on a dad venture to rescue my 968. Please, if you've enjoyed this video, you want to know more about this car and what it's like having an Aston Martin and 4 daughters, yes, only 3 fit in at a time, and this is one reason he might be having to sell this car, let me know. For now, I want to say a big thanks to you for watching, and don't forget to hit the like button, comment down below, and subscribe if you haven't already. Bye-bye.